Continuing our reading in Yellow Eyes by Rutherford Montgomery, Chapter 15, Friends Meet. The cougar is one of the most playful of all beasts. In localities where man armed with guns seeks to kill the big cat, the cougar becomes wary and acts on the defensive. Yellow Eyes could not go on grimly, savagely killing and outwitting Cougar George without playing part of the time. For many weeks, the loss of the golden one and his babies had made him surly and restless. With the coming of the deep snows, he regained some of his playful nature. He had a vast amount of curiosity about things new to him, and when he came upon one of Treon's rabbit snares, he paused to investigate. The snare was set at the foot of a hill, where a jackrabbit trail entered a spruce stand. Treon had loped a slender strand of copper wire above the trail at a height which would allow the unsuspecting Jack to thrust his head through it when he came leaping down the trail. Yellow Eyes paused at the copper strand playfully. He dislodged the wire and struck it. The loop slipped over his huge paw and pulled tight. Feeling the jerk of the anchored snare, the big cat leaped backward, a snarl rising in his throat. The wire parted, but the loop stayed around his paw. Yellow Eyes rolled over and bounced into the air. Finally, he sat up and pulled the loop free with his teeth. Shaking the snow from his eyes, he purred deeply and sniffed at the strand of copper. He was unaware that he had cheated a friend out of his supper. Further on down the mountain, he crossed the Indian's trail. With playful leaps, he followed it. This man was not followed by dogs. That was enough to make him appear different to the big cat. The scent was familiar, too. He had crossed the trail of Treon many times before. He had watched the Native American return to his cabin and had followed him when he had left it. The strange bond between which had always existed between the Native Americans and the dwellers of the wilderness, be they killers or prey, stirred to life within the great cat. He loped along the snowshoe trail until he sighted Treon laboring along through the deep snow. Treon was soon aware of the tawny phantom following him. He glimpsed the yellow killer twice. He was pleased and not at all alarmed. He knew that a cougar will follow a man for miles. The old men of his tribe told many stories of the cougars caught young and trained to hunt. Treon knew that the big beast can be a true and loving friend of man. He had no desire to tame the great cat, but his natural resentment against the white hunters who would exterminate so noble a beast whose motto was "Kill, kill, kill," made him desire to keep in touch with Yellow Eyes. To that end, he laid his course in a circle and got to the windward of the big cat. Slipping over a ridge, he hid in a clump of timber and waited. Yellow Eyes bounded along the snowshoe trail, pausing now and then to roll and tumble in one of the tracks. He came to the ridge where Treon had halted. He paused, his amber eyes surveying the white solitude below. Finally, he trotted forward. When he was opposite a clump of bushes, he saw that the trail ended. Halting, he stood and waited. When Treon stepped from the bushes, he leaped back. "Howchimbicka," the Native American man called softly. Yellow Eyes saw that Treon had no gun. The sound of his voice was soft and reassuring, like the purr of the golden one. The big cat sat down and stared at the man. "You are a fine one," Treon went on in his soft voice. Yellow Eyes lashed his tail and arched his back. He felt none of the savage hatred for Treon, which always arose within him when he scented Cougar George. "There will be beaver carcass when the snow gets deeper," Treon went on. "Except the tail. That Treon likes for himself." Yellow Eyes purred deeply in his furry chest and arched his back. When Treon moved, he leaped back and stood watching. "I go now. You may come along." Treon laughed as he gave his invitation. Yellow Eyes watched him mush down the slope. After a time he followed, keeping in sight of the man and making no attempt to stay close to cover. Treon did not look back, but kept moving steadily down the mountain. Yellow Eyes sat down at the edge of the clearing and watched Treon enter his cabin. The great loneliness which had been with him for weeks was lessened by this contact. He suddenly turned away from the cabin and loped up the mountain again. That night more snow fell, and the woods were locked in a soft and clinging solitude over which no life traveled. The days of lean hunting for the big cat were upon the high country. Deer would be difficult to kill, and the lesser animals would be burrowed deep under the snow. Yellow Eyes set about hunting with a thoroughness that should have been rewarded. He padded along ridges and nosed into thickets. After 6 hours of diligent rambling, he had caught nothing. Sitting down in the snow, he rested. Finally, he sought a ledge overlooking the valley and stretched himself out. He lay looking down into the starlit whiteness for hours. For the next 2 weeks, the big cat waged a grim battle for existence. He had no thought for the cattle yarded in the valley below. They would have made easy prey for him. But it was not his natural way of living. One night he ranged past the cabin of Treon and discovered, on a drift where the ridge came down from the slopes above, the frozen carcass of a skinned beaver. Hungrily, he pounced upon it and began tearing the meat away in chunks. Yellow Eyes did not notice that the carcass had been placed at a spot where any wilderness traveler would have crossed from the ridges above. He was not poison-wise and did not hesitate to gulp down the flesh of the beaver. Twice after that he came to the spot and found meat awaiting him. One evening Treon came by and stopped. The big cat growled, not very harshly but warningly, and went on eating. Treon grinned and mushed on down to his cabin. Later the snow crested, and Yellow Eyes struck down mule deer when he chose to. He killed more than he could eat and never went back to the frozen carcass. Gaunt coyotes and lean foxes began to fatten as they followed his freebooting trail to dine upon what he left. That winter the sportsmen again made the ski trip over the mountain. They saw the slain deer and lamented loudly. They went down into the valley and stopped at Cougar George, the human's cabin. The wealthy sportsman, Mr. Sale, was very angry. He demanded that the big cat be killed. "You've got to get him," he shouted. He's the last big cat on the mountain," Cougar George said slowly, "and he is the smartest one Tom I ever trailed. He killed 4 of my best hounds last fall. I cannot get him till spring." "We have to kill him," Mr. Sale said. His eyes began to sparkle eagerly. "What a hunt it would be! Think of treeing that big fellow and facing him." You won't never tree him. He don't go up trees," Cougar George said sourly. "Every mountain lion takes to a tree when the pack closes in," Sale argued. "Oh, not this tomcat," Cougar George said stubbornly. He's a dangerous one." Yeah, he's a dangerous one. I'll give $500 to shoot him myself." Sale was so excited he spilled his drink. There'd be no danger," Cougar pointed out. "You got a 30-06, ain't you? All you got to do is stand back 50 yards and smash a couple of slugs through him." "You take the glamour out of hunting, Cougar George," Sale complained. "A fellow would have to cook up a better finish than to tell fellas that at the club the cougar charges out of the thicket. I stand my ground and drop the infuriated beast just as his fangs reach for my throat." Sale was on his feet acting out the scene. Sounds good, only them big cats don't charge at you. They let you alone unless you try to steal their whelps. It's no different from killing a buck. You only shoot a buck on the ground and a cat out of a tree." This prosaic description did not dampen the ardor of Mr. Sale. The more he thought about hunting Yellow Eyes and killing him, the more he liked the idea. Before he left, he was in a good humor again. "If you don't get that cat before spring, we'll come up and stage a big hunt. I almost hope you don't get him," he said as he was leaving. After the party had gone, Cougar George sat down and went to work repairing a pack saddle. He was certain that, bearing natural death, the yellow killer would be at large the coming spring. He smiled as he pictured the hunt Mr. Sale would stage. It'd be an armed invasion. There would be a camp meet, a doe, at which Cougar George would be forced to wink. There would be many dogs and more guns. It would be a time of celebration during the evening with plenty of good liquor and a jolly good talk around a campfire. Cougar George decided it would be a swell hunt, and it might rid the high country of that pest which was causing him a lot of trouble. That's the end of chapter 15.